So the president is on its way to his office, and we can start, in a minute, I think. Now, we start now. Buongiorno, Presidente.
Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Ja, herzlich willkommen, Herr Präsident.
You're very welcome to our group meeting. I don't want to take too much time for an introduction. We're delighted to welcome you to our...
La traduzione.
We're delighted. Have you got interpretation? I think that needs to be resolved.
Sie geben mir einfach ein Signal,
Just wave once you can hear me.
and
Thumbs up once you've got interpretation.
I'm afraid I'm still not getting it.
Meeting. I don't want to... Introduction. We're delighted to welcome you to our...
So, should I give it another try? Can you...
Thumbs up once you've got
Can you hear me now?
I'm afraid I'm still not.
Is there some English or German, Italian interpretation now available? No, not yet.
I'm getting a text message from the cabinet saying that they
All
are
right.
solving the...
All right, so I just heard that the interpretation is done here in our group meeting room, but obviously it doesn't reach the president's office now, and they are trying to fix it on the president's side somehow. It's almost fixed. All right. Thanks for the info.
Try to say something.
All right, this is just a test. I'm not starting yet. It's fine, so the president can hear me now. All right, then please switch on your camera that we can see you, Mr. President. I will switch back to my mother tongue, German. I hope you can hear me now, because I can't see you. But nevertheless, Herr Präsident,
President, you're very welcome to our group meeting, a meeting of the left in the European Parliament. We look forward to discussions with you today in two parts. Firstly, we'll look at political issues, the political work of the European Parliament, the priorities as you see them, and also the work in our group, the reallocation of political rights in Parliament. We're keeping a very close eye on developments. And then there will be a second part to our discussions where we will look at the initiative you have launched, tackling the work of Parliament as a whole, making it more appealing to the general public. We look forward to discussions with you. Our thinking would be the following. You will make an introductory statement. I would ask my political group members to keep their questions very brief. You'll have a little more time, and then we'll have a Q&A session, and then we will move on to the second part of our discussions, trying to raise the profile and the appeal of Parliament's work. And that would be our second round of our debate, and you'll hear our ideas. So normally you give me the floor, President, but now I'm giving you the floor. So, President, go ahead, sir.
Martin, un saluto.
Thank you very much, Martin. Greetings to Manon Aubry, all the colleagues from the GUI. I'd like to thank you all for all the suggestions and support, and also points of criticism. That's always been very constructive between us. We have had a very unusual year. We're not out of the woods yet. The pandemic, I think, has made it very clear who we are. It's shown all our weaknesses. Obviously, a year ago, we started up trying to make an effort to be able to continue working, to not force the Parliament to stop. I have to say, over the year, various measures have been adopted which have allowed the Parliament to continue the EU up and running. However, there are many lessons that we have to draw. We don't just want to put them away in a drawer or forget them, because after COVID, we're never going to go back to how we were before. We cannot go back to how we were before, because we've seen with the pandemic, it's become clear just how many contradictions there were in the pre-COVID world. Social contradictions, environmental contradictions, institutional contradictions as well. That's why I think that this last year, where we're learning so much about the crisis, we've got to be open and discuss it with no taboos. This year, we've seen the European institutions doing their best, but we've also seen their vulnerabilities. We have to face the fact that there was a major debate about the recovery, the economic and social issues, but we've also seen just how many vulnerabilities there were on the part of the EU in dealing with the vaccines. So how come we've got these two Europes that are actually made up of the same institutions, the same people, actually, and to a certain extent, they're not able to be efficient, well organized, and to come up with rapid responses to our citizens? Why is this happening? Why is it that any time that where Europe doesn't have any competence, they step in, but it then gets into trouble? I think that's one of the real issues now with respect to the supply of vaccines, the contracts. Why is it then that where the EU steps in, even though there were no powers and no competences, that was given to the EU? So clearly we have to rethink this. I think that European democracy can improve only if everyone is aware, all the players, the political families, but also the member states. Everyone's got to be aware of the fact that certain powers then have to be transferred to the EU to make European democracy more efficient. Now, there are two key events that are going to allow us to think about this. One of them is the Conference on the Future of Europe. We wanted it, we've believed in it, we've wasted a lot of time in excruciating attempts at mediation to try to set it all up. It's now going to be launched on the 9th of May. But it's going to be a bit of a box where everyone's going to have to contribute their bit. We're going to have to engage our intelligence, our resourcefulness, our proposals. We have to make sure that the box isn't just led from on high, but that it's a grassroots movement from the bottom up. We need the involvement of young people, of social associations, of business, of universities, associations, NGOs. All of that has to be enabled, and we shouldn't waste this opportunity. Furthermore, I think it's time now that the Parliament takes stock and thinks about how we operate. We've seen what's happened in the past, but we don't yet know what the post-COVID Parliament will be like. And that's why I have decided to set up an initiative from the grassroots, listening to our members, listening to our administration about what the Parliament could look like in the future. Now, I don't want this to be a bureaucratic exercise. I don't want predefined roles, as we tend to do, sometimes quite rightly. But really, I do want there to be proper bottom-up participation. I want us to look at ideas for a post-COVID Parliament. As you know, this process has already been launched. It started with a questionnaire that I sent to all members. I've received a lot of responses, a lot of desire to participate, and we now need to structure it and organise some focus groups so that by the end of the summer we'll come forward with some clear themes. And then obviously from that we will have to change our rules, our functioning, the way we organise. But it shouldn't just be about changing the articles in the rules of procedure. We've actually got to think about the Parliament of the future. So I think that's what we're looking at today. Obviously, I'm very keen to hear your opinions. I'm very keen to hear what you think and to reply to any questions you might have.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Ich bin auch sehr
Thank you, President. I too look forward to discussions with you. I have a number of speakers. Firstly, Yunus Omarjee, and then Marisa Matias. So Yunus first.
Merci beaucoup, cher.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you, President. I thank you for taking this opportunity to have an exchange with you. I'll be very disciplined. And Martin has said we have 1 minute each. So I have a general question for you. And then I'll come back later when we're talking about a renewal of the European Parliament. On a question of general politics, I wanted to ask you about the European semester. I think we've seen that democratic control of the European semester is not sufficient, and that the role of the European Parliament is marginal. Except that the European semester is going to play a fundamental role in the follow-up and implementation of the recovery plan, and in particular as regards issues concerning national debt and economic governance. Given the amount of time we have, it is essential that the European Parliament takes up its place to move forward with ideas about new types of governance, and that is economic governance. And so I'm wondering, as President of the European Parliament, what initiatives do you want to take to that end? Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Yunus.
Thank you, Yunus. Marisa Matias, and then João Ferreira.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you very much, President. I want to take advantage of this opportunity to ask a question about the role of the President in the era of COVID, and not just having to do with the future. I'm part of the contact group focusing on COVID-19 vaccinations. There are various members of the European Commission as part of that as well, the coordinators of the European Parliament. And so I want to ask a question that I have. I think that these meetings are useful. Obviously, I don't deny that. But I do ask myself whether this contact group, whether these meetings, which are held behind closed doors, don't limit the scrutiny of the European Parliament and the democratic role of the European Parliament. There's a lot of information, a lot that has been debated, but then we never have the possibility of actually debating it with our colleagues and the other members of the European Parliament. And I think that would be useful and necessary. And so my question is, during this phase and looking toward the future, would it be possible to make that debate public? Would it be possible to have discussions during plenary where we can all talk about issues related to the vaccination campaign? My second question, just very briefly, still has to do with this issue, and has to do with the role of the European Union in terms of leadership and global leadership and distribution of the vaccine and the technology side of things. I fear that while we've begun this successfully with real efforts in terms of investment and in terms of cooperation between countries, between scientists, in terms of getting the vaccine out there. That's really good. But now what we're finding now is that we're coming up against problems, distribution problems and others. And so the European Union, I think, might be seen as being on the wrong side of history here. We're ignoring the rest of the world. And these are clear issues, and I think there are issues having to do with the technology and also with patent. And so when we talk about competition and competition with the rest of the world and regions, I think that it's very strange when we're talking about vaccines and technology transfer, and we're allowing China and Russia take the initiative on this, and they're the ones who are meeting this global need, and we aren't. Even though, cooperation is supposed to be a European value. And we really need that type of technology transfer in this situation. We need to make sure the patent is made available so that the rest of the world has access to the vaccine, in particular the South. It's not impossible from a technical side of things. We've seen that. There was a news that came out that this week that an old Polaroid factory has been transformed into a vaccine center, and we know that there are difficulties in terms of exporting the vaccines. But if we don't take action on this, other countries are never going to have access to it. And I think that the European Union and the European Parliament should have a much more active role here, and so that we aren't on the wrong side of history. We shouldn't ignore our responsibility to the rest of the world.
Marisa, next up.
Thank you. Our next speaker is João, and then Dimitris. Please do stick to just 1 minute.
Sim. Bom dia.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Welcome, President Sassoli. I just have a general comment quickly. You've said, President, that the EU, when it doesn't have enough competencies, it comes up against difficulties, that we need more competencies. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that the difficulties the EU is facing is because of our own choices and our own policies. If we say that the EU needs more competencies in the field of healthcare, for example, well, okay, but if the EU does what it's doing in terms of vaccination right now, focusing on pharmaceutical multinationals over the needs of people in terms of health, well, it's not an issue of more competencies. I think that's what the problem is. It's not the EU's need for more competencies here. So how can we improve the efficiency, the effectiveness of the Parliament? We have very concrete contributions we want to make. We need to increase the possibilities that we have as MEPs to intervene and to put ideas forward. The more that we're able to do that, the more viable Parliament's actions will be. And when we have Parliament debates, we need to have blue card and the 1 minute interventions. We need to open things up more than that so that we can have a real debate. We need to have true pluralism in the interventions, in the discussions we have, so that as many groups as possible can intervene as much as possible. We need to do away with some of these restrictions on interventions that were set up. It's just not enough when we're talking about putting forward amendments and trying to limit the interventions made by the MEPs, not having the opportunity to ask questions to the European Commission and other EU institutions. All of that are restrictions, and we need to, in fact, increase possibilities of taking the floor rather than reducing them. And I think I'll be sending all this in writing to the President's office, these suggestions, others as well, about how we can improve the effectiveness and the effective work of the European Parliament. Thank you.
Herr Präsident, ich würde noch
President, I'll take one further speaker, Dimitris Papadimoulis, and then give you an opportunity to come back on those questions. So Dimitris first. Thank you. President, you're very welcome to our group meeting. Could you tell me how the European Parliament can strengthen the role of this Parliament, ensure that it has greater resonance at a time when Council and Commission are very late in their response, say, to the pandemic? You know, some 60 Nobel Prize laureates and many in the public have all called for vaccine manufacture to be ramped up, for the process to be ramped up around the world, and for patent protections to be lifted. How can we ensure that Parliament raises its voice? Council and Commission has rejected the idea. So can you not address this issue? How can Parliament bring pressure to bear? We are vaccinating 3 times slower than the UK and the US, and we see vaccination coverage in Asia and Africa far worse. And so if we don't solve the problem everywhere, it will be an issue. Thank you, President. Now I'll hand back to you for the first round of questions.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Yunus, you know very well that the issue of the semester is fundamental for the proper workings of the EU. I agree with you that there is a lot that needs to be reformed, and maybe there's insufficient controls. Now, we know that at the moment there's the Marcus report going through the Parliament, and obviously I can only invite you to discuss it, to help make improvements, and to engage with it. Now, we also know that in the Commission things are moving. There's Commissioner Gentiloni who has come forward with a proposal to reform the semester. So I think these are opportunities in which the Parliament can make its voice heard, and in a determined fashion. Moving on to the vaccines, Matthias, I think that we need to work much more on the issue of licensing rather than patents. It's not an issue of patents, it's one of licensing, where it becomes possible to allow for production of vaccines, particularly in areas of the world where they're lacking vaccines. We have to insist on this. We're not going to get out of the pandemic only because the Europeans will be vaccinated. No. We need to vaccinate the Europeans, but we need the whole world to be vaccinated, the whole planet. So we really have to make much greater efforts at solidarity than what we're doing now. But obviously, let's not throw out everything that's been done. As things stand, when it comes to provision and supply of European vaccines, 40% of European production goes outside. It goes to low and middle income countries. It's going into COVAX. It's going into countries in our neighborhood on the East and the Western Balkans. We need to work much more on Africa. And these are efforts that the European Parliament needs to strengthen. But let's not throw it all away. On the other hand, we do need far greater transparency. I know that the contact group has been a bit of an issue. It's been very problematic. And that's because we need to revise the health competence of the EU. We were simply playing catch up. Now, the working group was doing very good work, but things came up that have left me as well pretty outraged when it comes to transparency. If we'd had more competences, it would have been possible to have more transparency. So I agree, the whole thing really hasn't worked. I think we've got to be very clear. Zhao, the issue of competence can give us opportunities that we don't have today. Having more competence means more transparency, but not only in the health domain, also immigration, for example. How many times is the EU asked to step in when they don't have the powers? They can't say, Germany, please, do Italy, France, Poland, Czech Republic, please, this is your quota of immigrants that you have to save and protect. But if you don't have those powers, you can only just step in. From my point of view, that is completely indecent. Furthermore, we have a public opinion that thinks that Europe can solve all these problems, but that isn't true. So the issue of competences, new competences in particular after the lessons we're drawing from COVID, is now becoming crucial. We are never going to have a Europe that would simply impose things. No, we want a democratic Europe which has debates and finds solutions to common problems. So that's why the issue of competences, I wouldn't simply brush that aside as just a minor problem. Now, obviously, the issues that Dimitri raised, yes, we do need to think about this and find the right approach. We could have some kind of impact when it comes to the TRIPS agreement, but we know that these are very long-run agreements, and it's not going to come. We're not going to find any short-term solutions or any appropriate solutions to what we're facing today. So I think now, as things stand, the role of the Parliament and the issue of licensing and supply is that we insist very strongly to say that we're not going to get out of this just by saving ourselves. No, we have to show as much solidarity as possible. And at the same time, we need to ask the Commission to take a firmer position to ensure that the supply programs for low and middle income countries are efficient, and they need to be strengthened. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. I've been told that we have some 15 minutes left, so I'd like to move on to the second round. Firstly, José Guzmán, and then Costas Abenitis. So José first.
Yes, I hope you can hear me well. The question that I have is very simple. Actually, it's two of them. The first one is I realize that there are several people in European institutions that think patents are not a problem. Well, we have several petitions with hundreds of world leaders that think precisely the opposite, and also the chair of the WHO, who is someone who should know. And I cannot understand for the life of me why we cannot have a debate in the plenary on this issue. The second aspect has to do with the the working group that is going to scrutiny the national recovery plans. And I would like to make a question that is also a call for the European Parliament to demand on all the relevant information for that working group to be more than just an informal conversation. We need to have the information in order to do our job. Thank you. And I would like to call on you to make sure that happens.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you, José. Costas Avranitis. That's our last speaker on the list. Costa.
Ευχαριστώ, Μάρτιν. Κύριε Πρόεδρε, σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που είστε εδώ και ξέρετε πώς.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being with us here today, President. You know that our political group will support all your efforts towards greater democracy. I know that you're aware of that. I have two questions for you. Why is the percentage in terms of the pharmaceutical contracts not transparent? We still don't have access to that information. I'm a member of the Libe Committee, and the Prime Minister of Slovenia has tried to convince us to watch a video when he should have been answering questions of democracy, human rights, etc. The Justice Minister of Slovenia, in fact, left the room. And the presidency of the council after next will be Slovenia. And then the Justice Minister of Poland didn't want to appear before the Libe Committee. I mean, don't you think that we have to take measures to protect the legitimacy of the Parliament and its committees, and also so that we can properly carry out our work? How is it that these high government officials are insulting the MEPs and the European Parliament? And we know that there's no intention to accuse any country, but when we talk about rule of law and democracy, that's an issue.
Noch eine Rednerin ran.
Thank you, Costas. One final speaker, Mr. President, before I hand back to you to answer all the questions. Sandra Pereira is the final speaker from our political group.
Obrigada, Martin. Just a moment. Oh, yes. Obrigada, Martin.
Thanks very much, Martin, and thank you, President. I have a question that we've already sent in to the President about multilingualism and this issue about each MEP being able to express themselves in their own language, whether we're talking about interventions in the committees and plenaries, etc. Also in shadow rapporteur meetings, it's really important that we can put forward our positions in our own language. English is not the mother tongue of most MEPs, and so it's really important that we're able to express ourselves in our own languages. And we see that in a lot of meetings, the only language that we can put forward amendments in is English. And so I have some questions about this. It limits our work. We know that during the pandemic, this has been an issue. A lot of meetings are now taking place on Thursdays and Fridays. Often we're no longer in Brussels or traveling, and sometimes that limits our participation and our ability to actually take part in those committee meetings. So I think it's important to come back to this in plenary. Also things like catch the eye, the 1-minute speeches. I think it would be really helpful so that it would be helpful if we could expand those, since right now there are a lot of limits on what we can say.
President Sassoli, bitte.
President Sassoli, you have the floor now to answer questions, and then I'll sum up.
Thank you very much, Jose. The national recovery plans, Jose's question. As you know, the European Parliament is going to have an important role. We want to start the process. We have a deadline, end of April, by which time all the member states need to have submitted their recovery plans. And of course, then we will carry out our tasks. Our powers have increased. Obviously, we wanted more. But as you know, these mechanisms have to be granted in consensus with others. However, today we are in a good position to be able to examine the national programs and to express our view with respect to the objectives to be met by the national plans. Then on the issue of Slovenia, I was informed right away. I had contact with Madam Interveld to discuss what happened. At the moment, I'm saying this because I don't want us to forget, I don't want you to forget what's happening. At the end of the year, we achieved a result that was almost impossible to imagine. In other words, conditionality rules that should apply with respect to the rule of law. No one expected it. As you know, in previous years, the debate had been very tumultuous, but we were able to obtain exactly what the Parliament wanted. In other words, a strong degree of conditionality with respect to resources and European funds and the rule of law. So I would like that to be very clear. And obviously, all the Parliament's prerogatives need to be fully exercised. We want to be a model of democracy, but clearly we cannot allow a situation where member states simply circumvent these issues. Some infringement proceedings for the rule of law have been embarked on for certain countries, but we have to really keep a close eye on this. With respect to Sandra's question, and Zhao also had come forward with certain examples about our in-house functioning. Now, we know what our strengths are and we know what our weaknesses are. That's what we need to establish, and in fact, that's why I'm counting on you. I'm counting on cooperation from all members. It's not just a matter for me, it's a matter for all of us to look at. Today, we need to think about reorganising the Parliament. It's not about going back to the old rules. It's a question of reorganisation. Let me give you an example. I've been here since 2009. If I were to simply be happy with the Parliament's calendar, I'd know exactly what would happen on Wednesday, the 12th of February 2078. Is that normal? No, I don't think it is. So the issue of the Parliament's calendar, of how we organise our plenary, how we organise our committees, how we organise, for example, multilingualism, digital issues. I think now is the time to look at all of that. Well, I'll give you an example that I'm sure you're very familiar with. Every time something serious happens where the Parliament feels the need to intervene, we can do it the coming month, because our plenary only happens 1 month later. But is that normal? No, I don't think it is. The Parliament has to have the right, and in fact it has the duty to intervene immediately on very important, vital issues. So rethinking the Parliament doesn't mean now that we are looking very finely at Article X, Y, and Z of our rules. No, it's much more about the idea about how the Parliament works. And that's why, of course, let me invite you on all the issues you mentioned, such as the blue card, the plenary, multilingualism, issues relating to strengthening the role of the Parliament. Do please come forward and participate, because I think it could be very useful. And we need to ensure that in the second half of our legislation, we actually enact some reforms. This is in everyone's interest, I believe. In particular, having a Parliament that works as well as possible. It should come out of this strengthened and give the members a much stronger role. This was the spirit behind my initiative. The parliamentary bodies adopted it. The political groups agree that it's a good initiative, and obviously it's for me then to invite all the members, because, as I say, I want it to be a bottom-up process.
Danke, Herr Präsident, dass Sie sich die Zeit genommen haben, auf die...
Thank you, President, for taking the time to address our questions in detail. There was a wide range of diverse questions. I hope that our dialogue with you can continue into the future. As you know, and as you have heard...
May I just add something, please? Now, I know just how sensitive you are to issues relating to democracy and social issues. And I'd like to thank you for bringing these issues to a debate that we now have to steer. Because there is one issue that I think we're overlooking somewhat in the Parliament. This is a period in which all of our countries are running up debts, all of them. But who's going to pay these debts? I think this is something that the Parliament has got to put on the table. And we've got to develop some kind of debate over this, because I don't want a situation where after COVID, everything that's happening falls to the shoulders of the weaker and the most vulnerable, as we've had in the past, whether it was the Lehman Brothers in Greece. We saw who paid the cost of that. It was always the most vulnerable, the weakest in society. Those with the least rights, young people, women. So I think that today it's only the European Parliament that can put this at the centre of the debate. And I think we have the authority to do that. But we can only win the battle on justice if our public opinion is on board. We can't imagine that it's something that's just going to fall from the sky, because we've seen how some people are behaving. They're trying to put the price of the crisis on the weakest, and they're trying to protect themselves from the difficulties. They're acting very selfishly. So what I'd really like, together with you, who I know are particularly sensitive on these issues, I would like us to think about certain initiatives whereby we can really impose change here. A change of gear, because if we don't do it, I don't think anyone else is going to do it. And I think we've got to be aware of that responsibility of ours.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, auch nochmal für die
Thank you, President, for those comments that have gone down well. We are a group fighting for democracy and social rights here in the European Parliament. Now, in the past, we would have raised specific issues and initiatives that can be seen through Eunice's question about the democratic scrutiny of the European semester, changing the macroeconomic framework so that the weakest in society aren't picking up the tab for the crisis. José's question highlighted this. The recovery plan, how do we ensure it is subject to democratic scrutiny and not just a case of providing information. We as Parliament, as MEPs, want to have an opportunity to influence and shape this process. So thank you for this dialogue and debate. We will continue to pass on critical comments, to raise progressive policies and politics through the European Parliament. We will strive to be constructive and look forward to further discussions with you, further cooperation. I hope that this dialogue can continue, that there will be another such dialogue organised shortly. We would like to see greater involvement of MEPs, and we want to look at the whole issue of rights that have been restricted through the pandemic. Multilingualism, how can we as MEPs put questions to the Commission, ensure scrutiny? We'll send all those comments and questions to you in writing. I think the debate this morning has shown where we stand on these issues, where you as President of this House stand, and on behalf of the group, I look forward to good continued cooperation, and I can promise you on behalf of our group that we will be annoying you where there is a need to hassle you, and we will be constructive where possible in future. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much. All the best.
All right. So we have already dealt with any other business. We have discussed the green digital certificate, so there's nothing left on our agenda. I thank you